Hi, this is David Humphreys with the first of a series of 10 tutorials on how to become financially free. Tip number 1, invest in property and make 50,000 a year plus $1 million in 10 years, and let me show you how we do it. There's a series of variables here and I'm going to go through each one to show you what the effect is. You start off deciding how many properties you're going to buy today, tomorrow, or over a period of time, and the average cost. We've got this set at 10 properties with an average cost of less than 100,000 or 99,000 to be exact. Then how many people are going to own these properties? How many people are going to be taking part in the development of this portfolio? And the reason for that is that each individual person is entitled to a capital gain exemption of currently £10,600. Before we go any further, I'd like to explain that these tutorials are completely unscripted. They're just as I would normally deliver them in a classroom or a lecture hall. So I apologize in advance for any ums, ifs, bars or pauses. Okay, let's go back to the exemption. And I will come back and demonstrate how these variables change these numbers over here when we've got through the variables. The next is your personal allowance. You can bring this into play. In most cases, personal allowances are taken up with other income, but if the person doesn't have any other income at all, then personal allowances can be introduced into these calculations. Then your tax rate. I've set it at 40%, principally because most investors are paying the highest rate of tax at some point, and I'm applying that to their rental income. Starting LTV, this is the starting loan to value, the amount that you borrow as a percentage of the cost of the property. I have set this at 75%. The variation, now there are 3 loans to value here, so you can introduce a variation. I've set this at 5%, so we can look at 3 different LTVs and see what the effect is. The gross yield set at 10%, maybe a bit high, but 10% variable, 10% gross yields are readily available today, end of 2011, and particularly with regard to the low-cost properties. Then we've got the interest rate set at 5%. This is the interest rate on your buy-to-let loan. Letting and management, if you choose to employ a letting and managing agent, I've set this for these calculations at the moment at 12%, which effectively is 10% plus the VAT of 20%. Operating costs are set at 5%, and again I'm going to come back to looking at the result of these percentages in a minute, but as I say, operating costs is 5% of the rent. Depreciation allowance. Unlike virtually any other form of investment, if you furnish the properties that you are letting, and I'll come back to what constitutes furniture because you'll be quite surprised, I think, you're entitled to deduct 10% of the rent received, broadly speaking, as a depreciation allowance. So we're furnishing everything, so we're deducting 10%. Then we introduce a gain rate, and this is the gain or the increase in value of the properties that are owned, and gain is a big driver in property investment. So I put a 6% gain rate in for the purpose of these calculations, and we're going to look at the gain rate over a period of 10 years. Okay, so those are the variables to play with, and in the next 9 tutorials, which I'll cover the next 9 tips, we look at each of these variables in isolation and look at the effect of doing this or the effect of doing that. An analogy which I always use in respect of property investment is a fruitcake, which may surprise you. A fruitcake has a substantial number of ingredients in it, and within the fruitcake there is the dried fruit, which in itself may be 4, 5, 10 different types of dried fruit. Each individual ingredient in a fruitcake affects the outcome of the final result, and so it is the same with property investment. Each of these ingredients and they are effectively ingredients in the pie, or the fruitcake, affects the result. Let me show you. Let me show you. Now, obviously, if I change the number of properties or change the average cost, that is going to affect the result. But you may be surprised at this. If each person is entitled to £10,600 worth of capital gain each year without paying tax, I've got this set at 2 owners, and over here is the result. £21,200 of tax-exempt gain is in the final figure. By the way, this cash in your bank is a tax-paid cash in the bank. So let's assume that we increase this to 3 people. £31,000 or £32,000 tax-exempt gain is now available, and the 52 has got up to 62,000, another £10,000. So if you were to buy a property, fix it up, let it, and inside that property you would have £30,000 worth of gain. You then sold it as 3 partners, joint venture, family, or whatever. Then you could walk away with just under £32,000 tax-free cash. Let's set this back to 2. And move on. I'm going to leave the personal allowances alone because, as I said earlier, in most cases the personal allowances will be taken up with other income, and likewise I'm going to leave the tax rate alone. What we haven't been able to do in this illustrator is to have a varying tax rate. So you've got to pump in 40% or zero it or a lower rate. Up to you. Remember, all these variables can be changed to suit your circumstances. But I'm going to change the LTV because at the moment I've got an LTV spread of 75, 80, and 85%. And 85% is not generally available at the moment. It used to be available pre-credit crunch days, but today it's very difficult to get 85% loans to value. It's more 70 to 80%. So let's take this back to 70% LTV. Okay, there we go. So now we've got a spread of 70, 75 and 80, and 75 is the most common LTV available today. Obviously you can go lower. Occasionally you can get 80%. There are a few loans coming out at 80%, but in most cases 75% is now the sort of the accepted norm. Okay. Variation of 5%, you can set that as where you want. 5% is a good figure, reasonable figure. Gross yield 10%. Well, obviously, if you reduce this, you will reduce the cash in your bank. Let me show you. Let's take it down to 8%. And the cash in the bank drops. Look at the 75% column. Drops from 52,000 to 41,000. Huge driver. And this is one of the reasons why this illustrator is so useful, because you can test with these variables what are the sensitive areas as regards property investment. Okay, so gross yield down to 8% drops the cash in the bank by £10,000, 2% variation. If we take it up to 12%, which is available, HMOs certainly, bingo, £10,000 up. So you can reckon that if I go back to 9%, 46. So let's take it back to 10 and see what the difference is. 52,000, drop it by 1%, and drops from 52,000 to 46,000. So it's about £6,000 per percent on this basis. Okay, so you can now realize that this gross yield is very sensitive in determining the cash in the bank. Back to the 10% we started with. Okay, interest rates. Now, you're not going to be able to do a great deal on interest rates, but if you were able to trim it back by, say, 0.5%, 4.5%, let's see what happens to the cash in your bank now. 4.5%. 54,000. So there's a couple of £1,000 there. Likewise, we went up to 5.5%, 49,000. So there's a couple of £1,000 per half point. Generally speaking, interest rates go by quarter percentages. So we started at 5%. Back to that. Okay. Let's drop it to 4.75, which is a 0.25% reduction, and that gets us to 52,187 down to, up to 53,301. So there's a grand per 0.25% at this level of borrowing. Back to 5% where we started with. Okay. Now the letting and management is a big decision. You're either going to buy properties that are further afield and have an agent let and manage them, or buy them locally and do it yourself, or buy them further afield but really put the quality in, punch the quality in, which I will come to in a later tutorial, and then you should be able to go the self-letting and management route, possibly using an agent for some part of the letting, or have a maintenance person on location who could do the showings. But let's just see what happens here. 12% is the average letting and management fee, which is 10% plus the VAT, currently at 20%. But if I take this back to 10%, which is 8% plus the VAT, or 9.6%, which is 8% plus the VAT, which is about the minimum that you can get. 52,000 again, I'm going to put in 9.6%, okay, and the 52,000 goes up, it should do, to 53,000. So there's £1,000 there that you can increase the performance of the portfolio by. So that was 12% down to 9.6. So you need to decide whether you're going to have letting and managing agents acting for you, or whether you're going to do it yourself. The best answer, if we take it out altogether, we zero this, then this 52,000 increases to 59,000, and that's a big wallop. That's a lot of money, So you have to decide, and this should be part of your early strategies, to decide whether you're going to go down the route of using letting and managing agents or DIY, because it will affect where you buy. There's no point in living in, I don't know, Kent, let's say, and investing in Scotland and expecting to do that on a DIY letting and management basis. Really, you need to be within, I would suggest, 30-40 miles of your portfolio. I live in Oxford. I've got a portfolio of properties in Wales, South Wales, and I have to use letting and managing agents to look after them. They're an hour and a half away, 2 hours, or an hour and a half on a good day, 2 hours on a reasonable day, and any problems arise, I simply can't get there quick enough. So that's another consideration and decision that you need to make. Okay, let's move on to the operating costs. Now, the operating costs really are a number. It is the insurance on the property, which will be a percentage of the value of the property, plus the statutory checks, which is £1 a number, plus the repairs and maintenance, which again is another £1 a number. So it's only the insurance costs which are a percentage. So when setting these, you need to look at a combination of, you've put it at 5%. So over here, we've got the operating costs at £5,000 on 10 properties. Okay, so that means that it's £500 per property average. Okay, so when you're setting this percentage, you need to look at the result of the percentage and think, is £500 a reasonable figure to cover these costs? Okay, well, you've got £125, £150 worth of insurance premium to pay each year. You've got £35 to £50 of statutory checks if you've got gas connected. Then what you allow for maintenance and repair. Decision is yours, obviously, but the better the condition of the property to start with, the lower the costs of maintenance and repair on an annual basis. Anyway, I regard £500 per property as adequate. I wouldn't say it's excessive. It certainly isn't on the cheap side, but I think it's adequate. So I've set this at 5%. Now becomes the depreciation allowance. And the rule basically is, and we will go into this in more detail in a later tutorial, the rule basically is that if you furnish a property that enables the tenant to eat, that is, have a dining table and chairs for the number of tenants. So you've got a family of 4, it's a dining table and 4 chairs. Eat, sleep, which is beds, and for a family of 4 you'd expect to put in a double bed and 2 single beds, and sit, which is easy seating. So for a family of 4, you'd have a settee or and 2 chairs or 4 chairs, whatever suited. Okay, you're entitled to deduct 10% of the gross rent you receive, less except where you're paying costs which ordinarily would be borne by the tenant, such as council tax or water rates or water costs and things like that. But as a broad rule, 10% of the gross rent that you receive can be deducted before tax is assessed. Now, I've come up with a secret way, a special way of being able to furnish properties so they comply with the regulations, but I don't have to replace this furniture. So if you use this 10% depreciation allowance can effectively become income, and I'll come to that in a minute. Finally, we come to the gain rate, and I've set this at 6% for the next 10 years. It's quite possible to buy properties in locations where you're going to see something like a 6% growth rate. That may not be national. I'm not suggesting that the country as a whole will see a 6% growth rate or gain rates over the next 10 years. That said, with a shortage of property, because nothing's being built at the moment, it's quite possible that gain rates could start to recover quite rapidly. But in any event, it's possible to buy properties in locations where you could reasonably expect to see a gain rate of 6%. And I've taken it as a 10-year period for purposes of this illustrator. Now, change the gain rate, and this again is quite sensitive. Here we've got the effect of the portfolio value at the end of 10 years with a 6% gain rate. So we've got a portfolio which is starting off at just under $1 million, going up in value to 1.77 million. Now, if I change that gain rate by, let's take it down 1% to start with, to 5%, this 1.7 drops to 1.6, £100,000. Likewise, if I take it up to 7%, it goes up from 1.6 to 1.9, close on 2 million. So again, a very sensitive driver is the gain rate, and you can play with this as well to suit your circumstances. And likewise, you will see what the position is after, say, 5 years down the road. 1.3 million, an equity of just over £500,000. So all the numbers can come together. So I'm going to set this back to 10. And now have a look at the numbers that we're producing. Okay? Let's look at the 75% loan to value, because that is the most common loan to value available today. We've got a taxable profit of £35,000. Now, from the £99,000 rent in this example, we've taken our operating costs, and these operating costs are all listed down here. So you've got your loans at 75% loan to value, you've got your interest, letting and management including VAT, operating costs and depreciation, leaving you with £35,000 taxable profit. There it is. The tax due, £14,000 at 40%. The tax rate over here, and then we've got the net of tax position of 21,000. Now the assumption is that you're going to sell at least 2 properties. Sorry, you're going to sell a property a year to generate a tax-exempt gain of £21,000. Okay, that is part of your income. All right, 2 of you in this particular case own the properties, and you will sell 1 property a year to generate a taxable gain of £21,000. Then we bring this depreciation allowance in. You're not going to spend it on furniture, so that comes in as cash that is available to be spent, giving you a total income of £52,187. Now, to work out what the tax rate is, because it's interesting to find out what rate of tax you are actually paying, you add back the tax of £14,000 to reach a gross figure of £66,245. Now, £14,000 as a percentage of £66,000 is 21%, and that gives you £52,187 in the bank. And that is the reason why I say up here, invest in property and make £50,000 a year. Now, having bought 10 properties at an average cost of £99,000, if you were able to buy them, if you were to buy them in a location where the average gain, and remember it's the average gain over 10 years, was 6% a year, then your equity at the end of 10 years would be £1,079,000, which answers the second statement here, plus £1 million in 10 years. You would be an equity millionaire after deducting the mortgages. And you'd also have, looking at the 75% column, in fact on the 75% column you have £1,030,000, £1,030,000, and then also you'd have £103,000 equity in each property. Okay, that's equity, not the value of the property. The value of the property, in fact, is much higher than that. Okay. Now, let's go back across here and just see what happens if we wrap this up. Let's assume that we took this up to 30 properties, but you're still buying them at £99,000. Okay? And you're developing a portfolio of 30 properties over, let's say, what, 2, 3, 5 years? Look at the change here. This £52,000 jumps to £114,000 tax paid. Remember, tax paid. Okay? And across here, your portfolio value 10 years down the road would be worth over £5 million, and your equity would be just over £3 million. That is why I say, how to become financially free. Tip 1, invest in property. That brings me to the end of this tutorial. The next 9 tutorials look at all the various segments in these variables and how they impact on the performance of your investment. So in the meantime, thank you for listening, thank you for watching. This is David Humphries signing off, and look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial. Thank you, goodbye.